First, we'll hear from Grace Person at the Local Government Commission, who will share LGC's guide to virtual engagement. Next, Dr. Larry Schooler, Director of Consensus Building and Community Engagement at CD&P, will explore low-tech tools for us to consider. Angel Hernandez, an Associate Planner at the City of El Centro, will share his experience hosting a virtual general plan workshop via Zoom in 2 languages. And my colleague at the Institute for Local Government, Hannah Stelmakovich, will talk about some high-tech tools and how to ensure authentic public engagement in this time of social distancing. Today's webinar has been organized by the nonprofit that I work for, the Institute for Local Government. Our mission is to help local government leaders navigate complexity, increase capacity, and build trust in their communities. You may know we're the nonprofit affiliate of CSDA, the State Association of Counties, and the League of California Cities. And our main program areas focus on leadership and governance, civics education and workforce, public engagement, and sustainable and resilient communities. We support local governments in implementing policies on the ground, whether that's in the form of technical assistance in designing public engagement approaches, or recognizing your community's climate initiatives through the Beacon Awards program. And many of our Beacon communities are on the call today. So what brings us to this call? Partially, I think, but also this is just a sign of the times as our technology is increasing. Like all of you, we've had to shift our projects, whether that is facilitating community steering committees or partnering with the community to identify clean transportation needs. These all need to shift to a virtual format. The shift is also, it's likely not going to be just temporary. The COVID-19 outbreak has really created a new reality, we think, in many sectors, including public participation. While ensuring inclusive participation is more challenging than ever because of the digital divide, language needs, and learning curves, there are many tools at our fingertips that we can use, whether they're high-tech or low-tech, to engage residents around energy, climate, land use, pollution, and more, without meeting face-to-face. Many of these tools and techniques, while they're essential in this time of physical distancing, also have the potential to engage hard-to-reach segments of the community, and we think they'll be useful beyond this current crisis. So before we dive into these tools and approaches, we wanted to demonstrate one of the many tools available to help you keep participants engaged in virtual meetings. And Zoom does have a polling option built in, but you can also integrate with others like MeetingSift or Polleverywhere that you'll see later, which can ask more dynamic questions and visualize results. So excuse my allergies, very itchy eyes and throat today. Let me take a pause to take a drink and we'll give MeetingSift a go.
Very emotional topic, isn't it?
All right, allergy season. Okay, so let me go to the next slide. This is a fun way to see who's in the room. So while I get this set up, I'm going to ask my colleague Hannah to introduce MeetingSift and lead us through the questions. We'll ask you to either open up a new browser window and type in the web address sift.ly and the participant code, or you can do this on your phone as well, but you just need to minimize Zoom to get there. So Hannah, I'll let you talk us through and then I'll get this set up and ready to go.
Yes, great. Thank you, Nicole. We just wanted to demonstrate another polling tool. So to get connected on Zoom, folks, either use your phone or minimize this Zoom screen and open a new tab in your web browser. You're going to just type sift.ly, do not type anything else, and enter participant code. And Nicole, you're activating. You can see how many people signed up, right?
Yeah, I see 30 devices connected, 36. It is quickly climbing.
Excellent. We have about 100 participants, so let's wait a couple more minutes. If you need, if you have trouble signing in, text us in the chat box. and will help you to sign. So this is a tool that the Institute for Local Government has used a lot in in-person meetings. With online engagement, there are various tools, but we wanted just to showcase the tool that we've used. Okay.
So I've stopped screen sharing so that everyone can see easily the meeting SIFT, but let me get this started. Again, it's sift.ly, enter participant code BMV5. So let's dive in. How many servings of caffeine have you had today? The crucial question.
It's a crucial question, but it's also a soft opening questions, what we call, just for your audience, for your public to get used to the technology. So you always want to start your polling with some fun icebreaker question. And also it gives time for people to sign up. Okay, are we ready to move on to the next question? Okay, what is the participant code? Nicole, can you?
The participant code is BMV5. I'll type that again in the chat. Okay, and we're on the second question. In which sector do you work? Looks like lots of government folks on the call today, as well as nonprofit. And looking like we have 70 out of 77 inputs received. So we got just about everyone. And then for the next one, we've got a question to get an understanding of what part of the state you're from. Okay, it looks like we've got quite a diversity of attendees from Southern California, the Bay Area, Northern California, all over. So thank you all for joining us. And let's go to our next question. How often do you engage with the public? This will help us tailor our remarks today as well.
Okay, let's see if we have lots of you engaged all the time. Not yet. Looks like all the time, monthly, quarterly. Yeah, looks like most of you are engaging on a regular basis.
And let's go to the next question. What are the top 3 challenges you face with public engagement? Sorry for the typo. And this is a different type of question where we have you rank. So the results show up a little differently.
Yes, so you're gonna choose top 3 in your experience out of 6 choices that were given you. And definitely there are more choices. We just didn't wanna show you too much information. Okay, it looks like insufficient staffing and resources. All the same people that participate are made our top 2.
Hannah, you're cutting out just a little bit.
Yeah,
I think you sound a little better now. So it looks like always the same people who participate, insufficient staffing, time, or money. They need more effective tools. There's some common things that we hear for sure. And then let's go to our last one in just a second. And just for everyone's reference, we'll share the report on the screen afterwards. One of the things that we're learning as we go through all of this and kind of learn live in terms of virtual engagement tools is there's always some sort of limitation that's a little unexpected. So for example, on Meeting SIFT, if I share my screen, you're not necessarily able to participate as easily on your screen. Or if you're joining from your phone, you might not be able to see the results live. So just some interesting things to consider when choosing a polling software. And then let's go to the last question. This is for you to fill in. What's hard about virtual engagement? And as you start to type these in, we'll have answers popping up.
Finding the best tech, Zoom fatigue, digital device, impersonal, building trust, reading the room, being burned out. People are distracted, nonverbal communication, engaging in collaborative conversation, finding best tech is popping out a lot, back-to-back meetings, not being able to see participants, getting the word out. Okay, a lot of answers that are repetitive. You guys are experiencing the same things that we do. Trolls. Okay, Zoom fatigue is popping up several times. Excellent, thank you for sharing. And here's our word cloud. Let's see if Zoom fatigue is gonna be there. Okay, here's the word cloud.
Awesome. Okay, so let's finish the meeting so you can see the reporting. I will go to that really quick and pop that on the screen. Okay, so you can see afterwards, we've got our report that we can share out with our participants. Hannah, would you like to walk us through this real quick?
Yes, okay, let's see if we have coffee drinkers in the room. Actually, not only 9% of you said we have 3+ servings, and 30% did not have any coffee today. Wow, excellent. In which sector do we work? Mostly it's government, then followed by nonprofit, private sector, education, utility. We have some students here, welcome, and other. What part of the state are you from? Southern California, followed by Northern California, Bay Area, Central Coast, somewhere else, and no one from Gold Country and High Sierra. Okay. How often do you engage public? Most of you engage public all the time, 44%, followed by monthly, quarterly, couple times a year. Okay, and top 3 challenges you face with public engagement. Always same 10 people that participate, insufficient staffing, resources, money. Need more effective tools to reach, and there's a cutout from that meeting shift. Another thing that we're learning, cannot type long questions, answers. Residents uninformed on issues, politically extreme participants. Okay, and what is hard about virtual engagement? We kind of shared the results in real time.
Okay, thanks so much, Hannah. Thanks for engaging with us, everyone. Let me switch to my slides so we can kick it off and send it over to Grace. One moment, please. Here we are. Okay, Grace, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Grace Person with the Local Government Commission, and I just want to give you a brief walkthrough of LGC's Guide to Best Practices for Virtual Engagement. This guide was a tool that we created in response to the real need people have for how to do engagement in the world of COVID and the pandemic. So we know people need to make connections and work together and share ideas and resolve the differences. And this is especially true since we need to be engaging the public to help engage and shape our collective future. During this time, when you're staying home and avoiding public groups, we still need to do, public outreach and engagement and help make our future better. So this document is a summary of best practices, key considerations, and specific guidance with the hope of supporting you in creative, effective virtual engagement during this unique situation and context. Because times will get better, but for right now, we just all need the tools we can use to engage with each other and with the technology that we have. You can find this best practices guide on LGC's resource page, as well as some other tools that you might find interesting as well. And that's www.lgc.org/resources. Next slide, please. Great. So some key considerations for effective virtual engagement include, we just want to embrace the virtual world and also embrace our humanity. we don't need to simply convert our in-person events to virtual ones. We need to recognize that there are some limitations and advantages to virtual engagement, and we can leverage them to the greatest benefit. So be aware that people can get distracted. They're going to try to multitask. They may be multitasking. You might be multitasking right now during these virtual events. And so we just want to make sure that we engage you, that your participants are motivated to stay engaged. And really what that comes down to is engaging their autonomy, their competence, and their relatedness. So we're all in this together, even though we're in different places. So some things to consider are your meeting lengths. Also think about the blend of what you're doing. Segment your webinar or your online engagement, so that way it's a digestible chunk. 20 minutes with a shift in presenter, breaks with Q&As, or even just physical breaks. I've been seeing several online conferences and webinars. You're experiencing one right now. 4 to 5 hours is a very large chunk of time for people to be on Zoom. As you all mentioned, fatigue. You also want to think about the different types of segments: presentations, Q&A, lecture, group exercise. Just really think about breaking up your event. Acknowledge upfront the limitations of your event, and that the virtual environment is, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a different space for many of us. So really be kind to yourself and be kind to others. If you have a physical or mental need that you need to address in the middle of a webinar, by all means, it's the same rule as when you're in the room. Take care of your personal needs. You can get up and go take care of yourself and come back. Also be thoughtful to other organizers and presenters. This is also something to think about. The outcome is more than the deliverable. So online meetings and virtual engagement, really, we need to be mindful of the fact that this is one of the few ways that we can engage with people. And so think critically about participant experiences and structure the event and content accordingly. So don't just think about metrics. How many people are on the event? How many people registered? What was the deliverable? Are there meeting notes? Really think about what do you want your participants to walk away from the event thinking, feeling, knowing, or able to do. This brings us to the purpose of your engagement. Before determining how to do engagement, decide on whether you even need to engage, right? One simple question to determine whether or not a virtual engagement is necessary is, will the world be better if we have this meeting? Identify ways that you want to engage. What do you want to get out of the engagement, and what will others get out of the engagement if they attend? What outcome will result of the event? So think about these categories. Are you trying to make a decision or have a decision made? Are you trying to improve participants' understanding of something? Are you trying to fix a problem? Are you trying to advance the field? Are you trying to build community? So those items are really motivating and results that can come from online engagement. So be very clear and specific with yourself about the result that you want from this engagement, and that will make it successful. You also want to understand the capacity of your target audience. So really assess their resources and limitations. So resources generally available to your target audience will influence how you structure your event or engagement. Don't expect more of your attendees than can reasonably provide. So think about how you can accommodate participants with limited resources or their obstacles. So send their meeting materials in advance. Consider sending hard copies to groups that don't have internet access, but would be able to go to a meeting site, practice social distancing, and be able to digest the information that way, and watch a YouTube stream from a location that has broadband or internet access. Acknowledge that some participants in the shared space, I have dogs. I don't want them to be barking, but they might. We all have children. We may have children. We may have leaf blowers and lawn care people or garbage trucks outside that can, interrupt the space. And also, that happens. And I've seen a lot of people be humble with their event, and people being accommodating to understand that that's going to happen. Also acknowledge that not all our participants can engage during this time, and also for the entire time of an event. Plan for different modalities. Think about how people can use the chat box like we're offering now, the question and answer feature. There could also be the ability to send an email. There could also be the ability, if it's a smaller group, of having the microphones on. Really think about your functionality of platforms, programs, and apps, right? So the more complex your meeting around a collaborative discussion may necessitate more complex platforms or applications. The more simple the meeting, the more likely you can have a conference call. Also think about your audience's capacity. Again, what are you trying to achieve with, what is your outcome for this meeting, your purpose of engagement, and then think about your platform to support that. Okay. Also, when you go to use these platforms or software or apps, make sure that you test them individually and collectively if you're designing something that is going to have integrated or variety of features deployed during your event. So really make sure that things work according to plan. Practice is your friend in this case. Okay, next. All right, so here's some specific guidance. I talked a lot about purpose of engagement, and it comes back to this whole thought of like, why are you engaging? And what do you hope to get out of that engagement? And what do you want others to get out of it? I talked about the target audience. So think about, who are these individuals that you want to join our event, or join your event, I should say. So your target audience will shape your content as well as the delivery method, platform, and virtual engagement tools. So really tailor your content and delivery method to the capacity of your audience. Include the level of background knowledge, technical capabilities, attention span, interest in the subject, resources available, and potential familiarity with the event platform. So again, if you're supporting a community or supporting an audience that has limited internet access, your better option may be a conference call. If you're trying to support a conversation in the Bay Area around land use planning and implementing shared mobility options, you may be able to do a more sophisticated and high-tech engagement process. And if you are thinking about, well, I just don't know who my audience is, you can also reverse engineer it and think about, well, who isn't my audience? Who does not need to participate in these kinds of conversations? Also think about, in order to select the type of event, think about inclusivity, think about format, and think about content. So inclusivity is this an event open to all, or do you need to limit it to senior leaders in the sector? Format is related to the use of your presentations, discussions, or hybrid. Is this going to be a lecture where I'm going to walk you through my PowerPoint presentation and then have Q&A and then have a group discussion? Or is it just, I want to get information to you? Content-wise, are the issues and discussion topics more academic, research-oriented, technical, or professional? So think about that context. And then once you've identified the type of event that is appropriate for your audience and the desired outcomes that you want to have, you can begin planning the event structure around the content. Think critically about your event implementation when developing the content, and remember to structure your engagement in a way that gives the audience autonomy without overwhelming them with too many choices or decisions. So really, if you want them to make a decision, don't throw the whole decision tree at them. Make sure that it's digestible. Make your requests clear and simple. Next.
We've got about a minute left, Grace, for your presentation.
I'm gonna spool through this then. There's a great spectrum of public participation that I think I'd like you all to be aware of, and you can go dive into at your own time. But this just walks you through, you know, the different types of engagement, information, which is information going out, all the way up to empowerment, and from left to right, the inform piece is least greatest of interaction and then empowerment is all the way to a very high degree of interaction. Okay, next slide, please. This is something very important I want you to think about. Here's some tips and tricks on doing virtual engagement. Think about your event planning. What are your start and end times? If you're going to have people in multiple time zones, list that time zone of the event in your announcements. And also provide any information and resources in advance. Giving people materials in advance, even if they don't look at it, gives them the ability to digest information and be prepared to engage. Think about your delivery method. Is this going to be a webinar presentation or breakout groups for discussion or collaboration? Next slide. I said it before, I'm going to say it again. Practice, practice, practice. Practice 2 days, 2 weeks, whatever you need. Make sure that you're testing your platform, testing with your speakers, making sure people have audio, have their camera, the platform is operating as desired, you're able to see questions. This practice of the past 3 months will serve us so far into the future. Okay, make sure that you identify your co-hosts and your panelists, and then also a tech team, at least one person who can support participants in addressing any technology issues, getting into the Zoom or getting into the platform, using the platform, whatever. Serena is doing that for us today. When you start your event, have it start early so you can do quick, you know, in real-time checks before you actually go live. Next, please.
All right, and thanks, Grace. Can we take 10 more seconds to wrap up?
Yep, totally. Perfect. Okay, so facilitating your event. By all means, lead by example. Again, embrace humanity. I'm a human, you're a human. We're trying to communicate in the virtual space. Be humorous or encourage humor. Be mindful of all your participants' needs. Unfortunately, I can't see all 109 of you, but if I would be reading every one of your faces. Regularly check your chat and question box. Our team is doing that right now. If you have questions, make sure that you're watching the raise hand feature. If this was a longer event, we would do check-ins about how to access multilingual information or translation services. We would be talking about what's coming up and how to sign on and which links, etc. Also, what's really important, like Nicole did earlier, walk through your agenda, provide a welcome and thank yous for people to joining us, provide introductions and roles, give an overview of the technical features and engagement like Tia did, and an overview of our event schedule and agenda. Nicole, if you could just go to the next slide real quick, I think it's important just to end on this. This is really important, everyone. Think about language access and disabilities participation. Zoom has the capacity to have multiple channels where you can do simultaneous interpretation and language interpretation. And even if you're on a conference call, know your audience, know their language needs, and make sure that you support them. Also, just be mindful of people's experiences in this era right now with the pandemic and social distancing, and then also our with the social and racial inequities and the challenges around that. People's lived experiences are really impacting their daily lives, and just be mindful of that and give space for that. And even if it doesn't seem related to the conversation, allow that to come forth and just hold that space. After that, I'm just going to say thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time. I hope you have a great day. Thank you, Nicole and Hannah and Larry and Tia and Serena.
Thank you so much. That was a fabulous overview of this guide, an incredible resource. And this slide's a great transition to our next presenter, Dr. Larry Schooler. So let me stop sharing my screen, and Larry's going to share his and lead us through some more interactive ways to host virtual meetings.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? So it's great to be here. I have a couple of confessions to make to you all. First of all, when it comes to reading the newspaper, I prefer to hold the paper in my hands. When it comes to getting the news, I like to turn on the radio that is next to my bed and adjust the volume and tune it. I'm one of these people who is comfortable with technology and some of the advances that we've made over time, but I like to think of myself as an older person walking around in a middle-aged person's body. In fact, I was given that as kind of a nickname when I was in high school, 15 or 40 schooler, they used to call me. But I think that as we think about ways to engage the public, period, but certainly during this pandemic when we're limited in face-to-face interaction, it's really important, I think, that we put ourselves into the shoes of someone for whom this kind of a medium that we're all in here is not necessarily viable. So I want to start by asking you all to engage with me a little bit and share with me a little bit about how you all have been engaging the public during COVID-19. So for those who aren't familiar, this is a platform called Polleverywhere. You can either go to the web address, it's at the top of the screen, or you can send the text "view from you," no spaces, to the phone number 22333. And then once you've done that, you just send a subsequent text of the letter choice that you want to make. So again, "view from you," no spaces, to 22333. It's not case sensitive. And then you can just enter the letter that that corresponds to your choice. So there's a question that I think got put into the chat window or the Q&A about Polleverywhere versus the platform we used earlier. And I don't want to say anything about the platform we used earlier because this is my first time to use it. What I'll say about Polleverywhere that's really significant to me is the ability for people to use text messaging. You know, I think it's easy for us to take for granted that we live in an era where internet access is becoming more and more widespread. But data from Pew and other research centers has shown that certainly at least 20% of Americans are without reliable broadband access, and that fluctuates widely by age and ethnicity and socioeconomics and education level and so forth. And so we really can't work from the assumption that someone's going to have internet access. And even if they do have internet access, it might not be of a speed or a bandwidth to support participating online in something like what we're doing today. So for me, the Polleverywhere advantage is partly just in the ability to accept responses via text. It also has the multiple question options that I think we saw some of in the last session, the word cloud feature as well. It's an opt-in, opt-out kind of service. You can, sign up for a subscription for a month, do as many polls as you want under that subscription level, and then just drop it after a month. Of course, they discount it for annual prices, but I have found it to be very effective in the public meetings that I've used. So it looks like we've had a lot of Zoom and video conference, a considerable amount of email, and some folks have used a screened hotline. And what I mean there is some folks are having city council meetings and letting the public dial directly into the Zoom or log directly into the Zoom that the city council is using. And I just got off the phone with a client who has hired us to be a call screener, to sort of be a go-between between the county commissioner's court and the public. So the public calls, we take their name and the agenda item they want to speak on, we put them on hold, and then at the appropriate time, we unmute them. This is a good way to guard against some of the infamous Zoom bombing that we've seen. It's also a good way to make sure that people understand where we are in the meeting and keep things flowing fairly smoothly. The only other question I wanted to ask is, how frequently have you used government or public access TV for public engagement? If you've already gone to the website, it should update for you automatically. If you've already texted, you can just use that same text to respond to this poll question. But I'm interested in how often you've used like your City of Los Angeles TV station, or you know, a station shared by multiple government agencies as a public engagement tool. A lot of cities and counties use, and state government use, their stations to broadcast the public meetings that they're having. I think that what I'm trying to draw here is a distinction between just putting the meeting of the commissioner's court or city council or legislature on air versus having something that is fully interactive, where the emphasis is on the participants, and the TV station is a key component of that. So it's interesting to see that a decent number of folks have used it, but it's not the majority in this case amongst this crowd. And I know there's a lot of folks doing a lot of engagement out there, so it's very interesting to see these findings. So as I think everybody probably knows, television is actually this incredibly underutilized resource that is at the beck and call of just about every governmental agency in the United States, and for that matter abroad. You all have this TV station, and some TV stations that are owned by a government agency are broadcasting 6 hours a week out of 168. They're just putting the city council meeting on and maybe playing it on repeat. Others may be putting the planning commission meeting on. This isn't necessarily the most riveting television. I understand that there's a certain obligation to put some of these meetings on air, but that doesn't mean that that's the only use for a TV station like that. And similarly, I think we also take for granted that text messaging, as low tech as that may seem in this day and age, is almost completely ubiquitous at this stage of the game. You see the statistics up on the screen. It's considered the #1 most used way of communication among Americans younger than 50, but you also see that nearly 100% of Americans have a cell phone, and almost all of them have texting that they can use. And so I think it's important for us to keep in mind that as much as texting may seem like just a way to tell someone you're on the way, or, you know, I've heard of even people breaking relationships over text, but regardless, texting has a lot of different uses, including for a public engagement purpose. So when we think about the different forms of engagement, and Grace got into this a little bit, we know we have certain traditional methods that are very hard for us to execute during the pandemic, like council meetings and planning commission and so forth. We're seeing now, of course, an evolution in that to where it's not just 3 minutes at the microphone at a public hearing, but interactive public workshops where people go into small groups, or pop-up engagement out in public, or task forces and stakeholder groups that meet several times over several months to come to consensus, or even training volunteer facilitators to assist in collecting feedback. And then I think we have a category that I'll call remote and virtual. And in this, you have a lot of different possibilities, including a paper survey that gets distributed to various community locations like public libraries and rec centers. We're going to get into televised meetings in a minute, telephone town halls we'll talk about, an online discussion forum. I encourage you to look at speakupaustin.org as just one example of what that can look like. So it's not just submitting a survey, it's actually an interactive threaded discussion that's moderated. And then we'll talk about text chats. And then I think we still have a lot of unpacked potential relative to AI and virtual reality to sort of simulate some of the challenges, for example, with resilience or climate change that government officials are trying to tackle. I think that it's helpful to kind of put the citizen into the shoes that they're in. So when it comes to public meetings that need to continue apace during this time, I think it's really important to consider involving some sort of host of the public comment side of things, a phone screener, someone who's able to interact between the callers and the elected officials, and a relationship with the government's IT department or TV station staff that's putting on the meeting. So you'll need some sort of bridge between the elected officials and the staff, a bridge for public participation. So for example, the elected officials might be on WebEx, and you can use a toll-free number, a free conference call as your public participation line. Then you need to make sure you've connected the two bridges with some sort of phone connection, and then make sure you're connected to the telecast. So the telephone hotline is connected via audio to the telecast. And then you make sure that there's communication via text chat so that everyone is on the same page about when there's a caller and what they're there to talk about, and then announce the new caller and then unmute the call and take them on air. So I encourage you to look at Travis County in Texas or Gainesville, Florida, where they have successfully piloted this. And I think it's an important thing to consider on an ongoing basis, not simply during the pandemic. But one thing we have to realize is that it's not all that easy for someone to devote the necessary time and resources and courage to speak at an official meeting. They're going to be on TV after all. It's very nerve-wracking. And so this isn't just something we should consider during a pandemic. It's something that we should be doing all the time. So this is a screenshot of the Travis County Commissioners Court where we did just that. This is just a quick, interesting graph from Lakewood, Colorado, where they've been inviting public comment via phone for a long time. And here you see that in-person participation tends to skew significantly towards an older audience. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that, but you notice that the online participation, the remote participation that's happening is much more varied. So now I want to get into the use of television, and I want to point out that some of what I'm going to describe may seem very highfalutin, and some of it, I would argue, is very much within your reach. The key here is you're trying to blend a number of different technologies into one program that really leaves no participant behind. You're televising the meeting, and in most communities, everyone, even if they've cut the cord, can somehow get access to the cable station that's owned by the government entity. So they may have to stream it, and they may need internet access for that. If they don't have the internet access, they can call in to phone numbers that are set up for that purpose. So we use a toll-free line in English and a simulcast in Spanish, so that Spanish-speaking participants can actually have their comments translated and incorporated into the meeting. And then we use the same Polleverywhere function that I just described, or that I just showcased rather, a minute ago, so that people can participate without ever having to actually get on the phone. So what you see here is that in some of the meetings where we've done this, we're looking at such a different sized audience than we would otherwise get. And these are not just people who are logging in to watch. These are people who are actually participating in real-time polls, either with their touch-tone phone or with text messaging. And so the breadth of input we're getting is so much larger than you would ever have at a sort of self-selecting public meeting we might have done pre-COVID-19. The other thing that we do is we dial out to a random sample of our population. And the reason we do that is because we want people who aren't necessarily predisposed to self-select and participate, who are often the most passionate on either extreme, to be the entirety of the audience. We want to really hear from, just the average person who may not have given much thought to the topic, but is going to be affected by the decision. We want to hear from them also. And so we might dial out to 5,000 people, and 1,000 of them might get on the phone, and we're hearing from a much broader cross-section of public opinion than we would otherwise. So before I walk through how we structure this, let me see if I can share with you a little bit of a clip from it. Give me 1 second.
Tonight, for the first time during this pandemic, and in one of the first times in New York City history, we are looking for a view from you. Maybe you're a small business owner and you need help reopening, or you want to give the city input on how to reopen and how to help, or maybe you patronize small businesses and want to give the city guidance. This show is for you. We'll ask for your input by phone, text message, and social media. The city will use your input to better assist small businesses and the community as a whole. Tonight's broadcast is made possible by the NYC Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, otherwise known as OATH, the city's independent administrative law court. It's where people go to resolve summonses they receive from the city's inspection and enforcement agencies. Each year, OATH receives more than 800,000 summonses. Nearly half of all summonses fought through the OATH hearing process are dismissed. We also have support from NYC's Department of Small Business Services. SBS helps unlock economic potential and create economic security for all New Yorkers by connecting New Yorkers to good jobs, creating stronger businesses, and building thriving neighborhoods across the 5 boroughs.
Harry, if you're there.
Yeah, hi. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
You can, yeah, go ahead. Share your thoughts. I know you're a restaurateur.
Yes, we've been on Gramercy Park for 34 years, family-run business, and my problem is...
So time doesn't permit me to go that much deeper into this, but as you saw, this was a broadcast that was put on for the city of New York. And the idea, the structure of it is that we introduce the topic, we then immediately ask some poll questions. And to the point made earlier, we start out with sort of softball questions like, what borough in this case do you live in? Or, you know, what football team do you root for? But then we immediately get into questions of substance. And in this case, we were asking about recovery from COVID-19 economic conditions for small businesses. We then had a panel that included 2 government officials and a restaurateur, a very well-known restaurateur. And then we took calls live on the air. We were able to take calls in English. And then when Spanish speakers wanted to make a comment, that comment was translated for me and I could incorporate it into the broadcast. So the key here is to try to enable real-time feedback for a large audience using these fairly low-cost and available tools at your disposal. I mentioned the Polleverywhere tool. There's another one called Mentimeter, and then you saw the one earlier tonight. It's important to make use of the quantitative and qualitative features, meaning not just multiple choice, but potentially open-ended. You may also want to look into a platform called Text Talk Act, and this, what I'm showing you up on the screen, is actually live. And it's meant to be what I call asynchronous, meaning you don't have to answer the questions in real time. You can answer them at your own pace, but you text, it sends you a question, you give it a response, and then it sends you an additional question. So that's all I'm going to have time for today, but I look forward to being able to maybe take some of the questions you might have as we go along. And that's that. I'm just looking at the chat. I hope I didn't say something inappropriate. I hear Dr. Schooler and not appropriate. Hope that wasn't me.
I think we're all just experiencing some Zoom fatigue, not you at all.
Okay.
You're good. That's all good. But thank you so much for that wonderful overview of some of those low-tech options that we can consider. I'd love to hear from folks. What's one new low-tech practice that you look forward to taking on that you just heard about? Or maybe it's something you already do. Please do share it with the rest of our participants on this webinar. And while you're typing in the chat box, feel free to type throughout the presentation. Just a reminder that we'll take Q&A at the end. I see some hands raised. I see some people voting on questions. The more votes, the higher the question will go in the queue. That's kind of fun and interactive. So next we're going to hear from Angel Hernandez from the city of El Centro, who's going to talk about hosting a town hall webinar virtually with live interpretation. And I'd love to ask Serena at this time to administer our Zoom poll. We are trying all of the different polling options today, so you can get a good sense of, you know, some of these polls are a little lower tech or higher tech, and it really depends on your audience and what you're trying to ask, among a variety of other considerations. So thanks for taking the time to chat in the chat box and also answer the question about if you've held a virtual meeting with live interpretation before. I'm seeing about 89% are saying no. So this is something new for our group today. And we're so excited that Angel is here to share his experience with us. So thank you, Serena, for administering the poll. And I'll turn it over to Angel.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angel Hernandez. I'm an associate planner with the city of El Centro. And one of the projects that we're working on currently is updating our general plan. As some of you might know, the general plan process, the update of it is a really intensive public outreach component, meetings, community engagement, all the stuff we can't do anymore with COVID-19. And I kind of want to share my experience as kind of doing a town hall webinar back in the beginning of April when when we just started kind of transitioning a lot of our engagement practices to online platforms. So next slide, please. So briefly, just to kind of let everyone know, the city is located in southeastern California. There's a population of about 44,000 people, so it's a relatively small city, and 86% of the population that identifies themselves as Hispanic or Latino, and about 80% of households speak Spanish, well, a language other than English at home. Probably around like 36% of the residents in the city have limited English skills. This is all according to the American Community Survey. So overall, you know, the city is a majority minority community. It has a big population that feels more comfortable speaking Spanish, and has also a smaller but still significant group that you know, they don't have the ability to speak in English or communicate in English. Next slide, please. So as part of our general plan update, we're calling it El Centro 2040. We're updating the land use, mobility, and environmental justice elements of the general plan. And an area that we are targeting is our downtown area. And we're basically concentrating on kind of policies to encourage small businesses, micro businesses. Businesses start off by people who don't have a lot of experience starting a business in the city. And in better times, we would have like a town hall meeting at one of our local stores down there, or maybe at a hall that we have in the downtown area and invite all the business owners and the community in general to go. But because of COVID, we decided to move that to having a Zoom webinar, which was, as far as I know, is the first Zoom webinar we've had in El Centro. So next slide, please. So some of the ways that we kind of advertise it, pretty traditional nowadays, is by social media posts. We create a nice invitation, and we send it out on our social media. We also had an email list of like the people that have attended previous town halls about the downtown area. So we use that list to communicate to them, let them know of this opportunity that we have for them to participate. And also a part of the Essential 2040 project is that we had a community advisory committee. So that's basically a group of 12 to 14 community members and not part of the city. And we kind of relied on them to kind of spread the word through their social networks and their professional networks about the meeting. And something kind of new is we just started cold calling like businesses in the area, community members, to invite them personally. There's some people that, you know, they're not on social media, but they're so interested in this. They either have a business there, or they're interested about opening a business. So sometimes this is like the only way for us to reach them. So next slide. And next, we'll go over the preparation. I think I'm going to kind of go over a lot of the topics that that Grace talked about preparation. I have to say that preparation is the key to having a successful webinar. And you kind of start off by assigning backstage roles to people, offstage roles actually, and people kind of moderating the chat box, making sure that the stream to Facebook or to YouTube is working correctly. Having someone muting people if people are unintentionally unmuting themselves. And something else that another tip for people that are working with interpreters is, if you have a script or if you have like talking points, share that with their interpreter. It really helps them kind of digest the terms you're using. I'll say like the interpreter that we used was, she was great. She had a lot of experience working with in planning meetings and kind of translating plenaries to English and to Spanish. So that's really great, and it just helps kind of give them the opportunity to ask you, the staff, or whoever's participating, like ask them like, okay, ask you like, what does this term mean? What's the context behind this? What's the background? And Also test technology. Everyone should be testing technology. There's always kind of hiccups regarding your broadband connection, whether the microphone in your computer is good enough, and also it helps make sure that other equipment you have is adequately. And next about the dry runs. So when I say dry run, I mean kind of just a rehearsal where you kind of everyone who's participating kind of practices the whole presentation. You have people asking questions and such to kind of test out those systems. And I really recommend that everyone at least does one of them, because in my experience, we found out a lot of this issues about, okay, maybe we need to assign someone, one staff person to be on the Facebook chat, or maybe we need to assign someone to be on the Spanish channel, so to answer any questions. Also, again, kind of give us the chance to say, okay, well, Angel's microphone isn't that good, so maybe he should wear some headphones. Helps us kind of smooth over those hiccups. So, yeah, thank you. So about the execution, for our webinar, we basically use the slides made on PowerPoint, and this is something that I saw we just did right now. We had a slide in the beginning kind of showing everyone where to click to access some of the Zoom features, how we'll be handling questions and answers. We had a little diagram showing you where to click if you wanted to have the Spanish interpretation audio on. And a simple screenshot like the one on the slide works really great. And to help with interpretation, what we did is we basically had bilingual slides. The thing is with the interpretation channel is while you have a different audio coming in, you're seeing the same visual. So it wouldn't make sense to have just the English text on the PowerPoint. The interpreter might be able to interpret it, but it's just kind of easier just for the Spanish speakers to just read the PowerPoint. So the way we have our meeting organized is that we kind of broke it up into like more digestible chunks, so we wouldn't have the same 2 or 3 people talking for an hour. So what we did is we introduced the topic, we discussed it, and then we had a question or comment slide, kind of like the one on the lower right-hand corner, where we kind of stopped the presentation and kind of we either got questions from the chat box on Zoom, or we had someone kind of forward the messages from Facebook to our chat box and to our Q&A. And this kind of keeps the meeting engaging. So like I said, you're not seeing the same people talk for an hour, and also kind of gives you as a presenter kind of a chance to take a break and maybe even have a kind of a more natural discussion with people who call in or anything like that. So next slide, please. So we also had our Zoom meetings live streamed to Facebook. So the benefit of this is that you're going to reach a lot more people on Facebook than on Zoom. It's just more natural people. It's more, it's easier for people to kind of log in. The challenge is the discussion on Facebook, it's, it doesn't get sent automatically to Zoom, and it's kind of hard to it's kind of challenging to have the speakers or the moderator kind of, focus on Zoom and also look at the Facebook chat box. So what we did is we had a staff person be on the Facebook account, and then they kind of they got the questions or the comments that people had, the substantive ones, and forwarded to us so we could answer them to the Zoom participants and also to the Facebook participants. And the thing about the interpretation function on when you live stream is you can only live stream one audio from Zoom to Facebook. So we wouldn't be able to stream the English original and the Spanish interpretation at the same time. So that's something to keep in mind. And to wrap it up, we had really great attendance. We counted about like 90 participants, and I would say, you know, if it was a regular meeting, I would think we would have like probably a third of those people attending in real life. So having a virtual webinar does kind of, I'm assuming it's more convenient for a lot of people. I'm not too sure of how we attracted new people to come in to have a discussion. That's something that I would kind of want to know. For some reason, I wasn't able to find out how many people were listening to the Spanish audio. From what I know, like we just had a list of everyone who was attending the Zoom meeting, so we weren't able to. I wasn't able to get kind of like a number of how many people were listening to the Spanish audio, and this is kind of important because with that information, we would have like kind of maybe adjusted our advertising or our noticing to kind of make sure that we targeted more people that we didn't reach. And one thing to consider is kind of the difference between Zoom and Facebook, and kind of really general is Facebook, you can reach a lot more people, but I think that the engagement is a little bit less than in Zoom. Zoom is just kind of better platform for kind of two-way engagement in my opinion. And you know, just kind of things that we've been talking about before is kind of, there's always gonna be like barriers to people, maybe not only access, but just, you know, comfort, and, you know, people to, you know, there's Zoom fatigue, but people just don't even want to try Zoom, which is a problem. And finally, about an interpreter, I really recommend that people get a professional interpreter that have experience. I know we have a lot of people that are bilingual, but it's more important to kind of get someone that has experience working with like the terms that you use in your profession, as opposed to the terms that we probably use at home and or in our social lives. So that's why I really recommend that you get a professional interpreter. Something to consider is, you know, someone who's listening to the Spanish audio, and if, you know, the interpreter is not kind of communicating all the right words, they're gonna probably tune out, and they're gonna think, oh, well, this is this is great, but this is kind of wasting my time because I wasn't able to participate fully. So that's about it. So I could answer any questions probably later in the seminar. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Angel. And just to keep us moving so that we have some time for Q&A, I'll turn it right over to my colleague, Hannah Stelmakovich at ILG. Hannah, can you take it away?
Yes, great. Can you hear me well? Okay, pause me at any time and I'll switch to my backup option, which is phone. Okay, so we want to talk about high digital engagement. Next slide.
Hannah, you're starting to break up now. Sorry.
Oh, no.
Funny how that happens. We'll just do that shift really quick. But while Hannah's shifting her audio, please feel free to type in your questions, type in the chats. We'll be live answering your questions, and we'll try to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Okay, Hannah, are you ready?
No, I'm not ready.
Okay, almost. But while she's doing that, looks like we have one question that we can answer now. Let's see. And this question is for Angel. What time during the day did you host your meetings?
I think I just typed it. Yeah, that was at 11 a.m. Yeah, like, no, actually 11:30, I believe. And we kind of wanted to catch everyone in the daytime. I think kind of daytime meetings are better because people they have more energy and stuff. And we chose the middle of the day because we thought people could kind of just, you know, join us during their lunchtime.
Great. Larry, what about you? What time did you host your television meetings?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I mean, because I had similar thoughts to Angel's actually when we did the one in New York City. I at first was going to fall back on my usual kind of 7 p.m. local time for these, because that's been, in my experience, kind of the golden time where dinner is over, but bedtime may or may not have started. You know, folks, if they work a normal schedule, they're usually home by then. but some of the bigger, more popular programming may not have started. But to Angel's point, I think we started the New York City one at 5:30 because we felt like we wanted to, capture folks as they're still kind of in semi-work business mode before they kind of wanted to switch off that way of thinking. And I'm open to doing some in the middle of the day if they're sort of targeted to particular audiences, and there's a tremendous amount of publicity. I mean, obviously people have been willing to watch, various governors, give press conferences at all hours of the day. So, I think it's worth considering, but generally I've gone with early evening to middle evening.
Great. That's really helpful to know and great question. Hannah, how you doing? Ready? Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Technology. Okay, so I know we're running a little bit out of time, so I would like to be brief and feel free to follow up with me with extra questions. So there are a lot of new normals, but what still remains the same is we want to do authentic public engagement. There are a lot of meanings for the authentic public engagement, and Grace and Angel and Larry already touched on it. The goal is still to be intentional and figuring out the right tool for the right community. The goal is to be deliberative and figuring out how can we provide space for dialogue, what we're going to be doing with this input, how can we communicate the outcome of the engagement. The dialogues is crucial in this online engagement. Information out one way is just no fun and creates a lot of Zoom fatigue, as you guys mentioned. And cultural competency is the thing. It's a real thing. It always has been, including language access, understanding audience we're trying to reach, and crafting the message that works for the audience we're trying to work with, trying to engage. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are a lot of different high-tech tools or different digital engagement platforms, what we call. Even before COVID-19, we always told our local jurisdictions we're working with, you have to have a mix of online and in-person engagement activities to increase your outreach, to bring more voices into the conversation, more diverse voices. Now, as we're shifting to Zoom, this is our online meetings, online in-person meetings now, and each jurisdiction for each project, you can consider alternatives, what we call high-tech tools, such as social pinpoint, mind mixer, MetroQuest, engagement, HQ, or bang the table. And what that platforms really help you with is a one-stop shop. People can do surveys and polls, and people can get education on the project. People can do mapping in real time, budget challenges, any types of games, any types of prioritization. So these tools allow you to do all that, like all different spectrum to collect input to engage your audience. Next slide, please. So how do we choose between all these different tools? And some of you mentioned in the poll, like, what is the right tool? Well, you may not like this answer, but it really depends on your project, on your audience, what level of input you're trying to collect, what are you going to be doing with this input? And based on this, what we call initial assessment, you can pick and choose the tool that works for you. Are you just trying to educate your audience? Do you need quick qualitative input to understand community concerns around climate action? Do you want to brainstorm alternative solutions and bring community into this brainstorming sessions? Do you need to do some consensus building and make sure that whatever community decides, we need to reach the consensus, because what community is going to decide is going to be incorporated in the final decision making. And those high-tech tools or digital engagement platforms actually do all that. They have all these features. Again, going back to your project, to your purpose of your engagement, what you're going to be doing with the input. If you just need to do education and collect quick qualitative, quantitative input to understand community concerns around climate threats. So perhaps you can just do your regular website and your regular polling. You don't need to go all in depth with this high-tech tools, which require time, access to internet, which require so many features. It takes time to go through all these features and to use the tool. So again, understanding your community is crucial. And I want to just pause for just one moment, and I want you to look at this slide and just read through the categories for our fellow community members that don't usually engage. We call them, we say different phrase when we think about this community: hard to reach, beyond the usuals. But when I look at this list, I think about I need to be intentional and I need to be creative, and I probably need to form a lot of partnerships with local nonprofits and community-based organizations who know how to work with these communities and what are the best ways to engage. One tool we wanted to highlight today, I mentioned 4, but give you just one example because of the time, is the tool that the Institute for Local Government had experienced using and observing how it's working for the community through our AB 617 work, which is Community Air Initiatives, and we're working with the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. The community is going through the process of, it's a community-led, community-based process of understanding air pollution concerns, understanding how to monitor these concerns, and what are some creative solutions to emission reductions. It's a 5-year process plus monitoring, and it requires monthly engagement of the steering committee. So what we've learned from moving to online space is that there's a need to provide additional engagement opportunities. In person, we had a lot of mapping exercise, like mapping and dots and write on the chart paper, and that allows to collect all this local data, all this local community knowledge about air pollution sources, where they're coming from, what's causing it. In the online environment, Zoom does not provide that feature. You can still do simultaneous translation with Zoom. You can still do breakout groups for the deeper dive conversation and do your quick polling, but the mapping is not there. So one of the options that the Air District has selected was a social pinpoint tool, and we asked the steering committee members to map out the sources of air pollution concerns on this tool and provide some comments. I want to share another screenshot. If you can go to the next slide, Nicole. This screenshot is not from the AB 617 project. I just wanted to show you another screenshot because social pinpoint, just like other tools, have idea mapping, mapping and priorities, idea wall, commenting. You can choose comments by categories, color coded. There's a whole suite of options. And again, depending on your project, you don't have to utilize all these options, and it's really up to you which one you need to use and up to your community, because again, a learning curve, access to technology is still a challenge. And speaking of challenges, or as we tend to think opportunities, if we can move to the next slide. Some of the lessons learned so far using this high-tech tools, again, understanding your community is the key. This is a great tool. You can collect a lot of data in a variety of ways. But what about if majority of your community or people you try to engage don't have access to internet, or they don't even have access to, tablets, so their smartphones don't have internet. So one of the creative solutions that the Air District came up with for this project is partner up with community-based organizations, and they they provided internet and devices and a little tutorials how to use the device, the internet, how to get on the social pinpoint. This was one of the solutions. Another solution, we do need to do this mapping exercises, but what if our community members get on the websites, they're like, I don't know what's happening here. This is not for me. We all have different learning curves. And for some of us, this high-tech social tools may not be as intuitive. So one of the creative solutions, we actually set up a little learning sessions on the side, like a separate learning sessions where we walk the community members. This is how you use the tool. Another alternative is to actually do the mapping in real time. Bring your community members on Zoom, have this tool open, and get this feedback in real life and map this, kind of do the work for them. Language access is always a consideration when it comes to high-tech platforms. Some of them have Google Translate function, but it's not ideal. You still want to do a professional translation. So basically, at the end of the day, you need to work one-on-one with these tool providers to understand what are the language access solutions they have with that tool. For example, for El Centro community, where almost 90% of people speak English other than language and other than English, and when you dig a little bit deeper in the census data, you might see that high number of people have limited English proficiency, so they will not be able to use this tool. There's just too much going on. Okay, what else?
Can I ask you to take one more minute to wrap up, Hannah, then we can go to Q&A?
Yes, so at the end of the day, please take your time. If we can go to the next slide. Please take your time. We gave you an example of 4 different tools, and there are more tools there. Please type them in the chat box, tools that you've heard. Please take your time and connect with those tool providers one-on-one. You know your project and talk to them. You know your community, you know your community landscape. Whom are you trying to reach? Whom are you trying to engage? And what type of barriers you might have with that tool? And there are options to think creatively, like with the example of the Air District, how we can still engage people using this tool. And on the previous slide, I gave you 3 different examples how other tools that I mentioned at the beginning, the table, MetricWest, and MindMixer, how these tools have been utilized for climate action planning in other jurisdictions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hannah. So we're going to transition to Q&A. And one of the cool things about Zoom is that you can live answer questions and answers, or questions rather, that are open. You can file them to answer, and the participants can see those answers, which is a great way to field a lot of these questions. And then another cool feature with Zoom is that live engagement. So given what you just heard from our presenters today, what are some other high-tech public engagement tools or platforms you might have heard of or used? We'd love to see what you're using in your communities. So while you're typing that in, let's go ahead and transition to some Q&A. And really quick, Hannah, can you give us an idea about how much these advanced tools might cost, such as social pinpoint?
Yes, we get this question a lot. You know, it's when I reach out to people who, you know, do this tool, they really are reluctant of giving me this information. They always say, it depends on the project, it depends on how many times you're going to be using, it depends on the number of participants. Okay, so what I personally seen and the information I was able to get out, anything between $5,000 and $20,000. I think the most expensive was, I think, MetroQuest. But again, it depends on a lot of factors.
Thanks. And I'm seeing some other tools come in the chat box, such as Mural, GoToMeeting, or GoToWebinar. We do have some questions about Zoom and this platform's security. So I did see a question about one school board is not allowing their commissioners, I think, to share their video. And then others are asking about if Zoom is secure for their city to use. What are your thoughts, panelists, on Zoom or other platforms maybe that are a good alternative?
I mean, I think this is one of those things where, Zoom has, I think, attracted a lot of attention because of the ease of use and the consumer-friendly quality to it. And, my wife would kick me out of the house. She's a Microsoft employee if I didn't say something about Teams, for example, or, my sister-in-law if I didn't say something about GoToMeeting from Citrix, I really, to me, I think some of those decisions come much more down to cost and to the ability to manipulate the tool to do what it is that you want it to do. And I think from a functionality standpoint, Zoom, definitely checks a lot of boxes for a lot of the meetings that we're wanting to have. But I really just want to caution everyone against expecting people to be able to participate on on a large scale on any single platform. I mean, I really don't think that's viable, not just for capacity reasons, but because of all that we've talked about so far, that, you know, access to internet and high-speed internet in particular is far from ubiquitous. And so, you know, from my perspective, I've worked with WebEx, I've worked with Skype, I've worked with Uber Conference. I mean, I think they all have kind of pros and cons. I tend to think that, again, it should be a decision that's based on kind of the ultimate purpose for the use of the tool, the long-term plans for the tool, and some questions about functionality. But at this point, you know, they're all kind of, I think, racing to capture similar parts of the market. And so I don't think you're going to see a huge differential in terms of what they can all do.
I'm also going to jump in for a quick second and say it also depends on the security features. There's options of providing passwords and, you know, creating a screening feature, frankly. You know, whoever is the host or co-host can admit people or not. So yeah, the concern is having, you know, a Zoom link out in the wild and then having the drop-ins happen. But because that was a short period of time, just as Larry was saying, the developers understand this. They're creating protocols to fix it, to eliminate that malicious behavior. And then it's also just a matter of understanding, you know, like Larry said, what's the purpose, who's the audience, and how do you create that little bit of control and sense of security? And some of the ways to do that is to provide passwords or to create accessibility portals. So that way it's not just random anyone. The use of live streaming is a great way to expand participation. And then participants can send in their email question. They can email their questions by watching the YouTube stream. So even if they aren't a quote live participant in the event, they can still engage.
Thanks, Grace, and thanks, Larry. So we talked about a lot of ways to engage the community on some really important topics, but also important is celebrating together. So how would you recommend, you know, transitioning some of those celebrations that we usually have in person to virtual platforms? Have you experienced this? Do you have any tips or tricks for something that is fun and engaging?
Well, I'd like to just say that the high school class of 2020 did something spectacular. They got their caps and gowns and they stood out with each other and they celebrated, right? Like teachers are doing Zoom's meeting, you know, Zoom classes, right? Whatever way that we can honor the moments that and the big achievements, even if it seems like we can't be together, that's something we can do. We could have, you know, virtual choir groups. I've seen, you know, some of my friends' churches do that. They do virtual choir sessions. Ribbon cuttings, I don't know, get creative, use your imagination. Okay, this is going to be a silly example, but bear with me. My nephew is young and his grandparents are in one city and he's in another city, and they actually took their truck, the toy truck that he has at home, and they have one at their house, and they drove it across the screen. And his dad, they got his dad on the other side, and they like made it appear out of nothing, right? Like it made it appear out of the screen. What kind of creativity can we employ for these celebrations that we as a community can need to have, that we need to, you know, see for each other? Use your imagination, get creative. Maybe there's something magical that can happen, and we'd love to hear those stories.
And make it participatory. You know, don't make people watch something else. Let them cut their own, you know, makeshift ribbons, or let them, you know, do something with their hands, or I don't know, hold up a sign with something on it, but, you know, involve them. Don't just leave them passively watching.
There's been amazing, you know, in the last few years, there was the ice bucket challenge for, you know, fundraising for the different groups. There's all these different kinds of challenges. I think we're just on the cusp of that. So yeah.
Yeah, it's time to get creative and enjoy our time together as much as we can, either virtually or in person, which we can hopefully do again soon. But we're all out of time, so I'd like to thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much to our panelists for your expertise and for sharing your stories. I'd like to turn it back to Tia really quick to wrap us up. And again, just thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. I hope you all were able to enjoy the webinar and find it really engaging. On our next slide, you will see the upcoming events we have taking place. So we really want to encourage people to check out the SEEC website. Also, I just sent it in the chat box. It's really important for us to understand like how engaging and helpful these webinars are. So we created a post-webinar survey, and there will be surveys for all of our webinars that take place, because we want to make sure we're providing content that is actually really meaningful for you all. So thank you again for taking the time to attend our webinar, and we hope to see you next time. Have a good afternoon, everyone.